Welcome to the Neurogenic Integration Podcast, where we explore the incredible potential of neurogenic tremoring beyond the basics. I'm Alex Green.
And I am Sylvia Song-Shields. Together, we'll be diving into how this natural, innate process can be seen and applied across different professions, healing modalities, and in scientific research.
Whether you're a practitioner, a coach, a therapist, a body worker, or a researcher, this podcast is for you.
Join us as we uncover the science, share experiences, and explore how neurogenic integration is revolutionizing the way we approach stress, trauma, and well-being.
So take a breath, get comfortable, and let's dive in. All right, well, I'm really excited to be sitting down this afternoon for me and morning for Daniel, but I'm sitting down with Daniel Seifert, and he's in Singapore, and I'm in Boulder, Colorado, and we're going to have a conversation about TRE, tension and trauma releasing exercises, and neurogenic tremoring in general. And Daniel is a writer and editor with over 15 years of experience writing stories for major global publications, including the BBC, New York Times, National Geographic, and Time Magazine, and others. And Dan and I connected by email. This is our first time connecting for a conversation, but he shared with me just a little bit of some interesting experiences he had when he began practicing neurogenic tremoring. And I said, wow, I'd be interested in hearing a little bit more. And so that was enough to get Dan on the line for a conversation. So in any case, Dan, thanks so much for joining today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Well, I'm joining selfishly as well. Love to tell my story, but as a journalist, I'm here also to kind of pick your brains. And I'm so curious about this new modality that I've found. So yeah, it's going to be a good two-way conversation.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, that's what we've agreed ahead of time that, I get to interview Dan, but he's usually in the interviewing chair. So he said, he wants to ask some questions too. And I said, yeah, perfect. Let's do that. We'll have a bit of a back and forth. Well, Dan, why don't you start by just sharing a little bit about, maybe even just if you want to include some biographical detail, that's fine. But just tell us a little bit about you, and then leading into how TRE, this shaking, tremoring practice, came on your radar.
Sure. I mean, I think a lot of people come to these things, because of their lifestyle, their work. No matter what industry you're working in, we all face time crunches and challenges. So I think most people nowadays, we are looking, and this is the one good thing, I think, with a lot of algorithms, is that, YouTube and all these channels, they then start to seed these things. You do a quick Google search on is this a good de-stressing technique? And then very random things start to come up. So, working where there's always a deadline, and I've worked a lot in agencies as well. You're always looking for a way where you can kind of center yourself, calm the stresses physically and mentally. And obviously you hope that's going to be a silver bullet. TRE, I think weirdly become something that I had never heard of. So it feels a little bit like that. I only discovered it, in the past year or so. But I think that was it. It popped up randomly as a YouTube video. I clicked, you click one and then you click a couple others, you get really interested. And then obviously you try it. And I think the good thing with it is it's, there's no sensei required. All of these videos are there, people just in their back room. The effect is obviously dramatic, but it was really fascinating how all that technically is needed, at least physically, is just to kind of find the position where you invite the tremors. And, I've worked a lot in branding as well. I think the branding of inviting tremors is such a fascinating way to immediately reframe how we think about stress, how we think about what we think is bad. Tremors are always something we are taught, especially in many societies.
Connotation, sure.
Bad connotation, so to invite tremors. So the short story is that, I actually within a couple of tries, I was able to actually do it quite quickly. And just the effects were amazing. in terms of, jaw tightness was kind of gone. I slept amazingly that night. That's the short answer. The long answer is that I think things come to you when you're ready a little bit. Not to get too kind of hippie about it, but I think if I had just been your average stressed person who had never tried any other thing in the wellness space,
Right.
and something like this had popped up, I would have dismissed it as just seeming like a strange fad. So I think I've had a long journey of kind of experiencing modalities that are actually quite simple but incredibly effective. So the first thing I can remember is getting into acupressure, Chinese acupressure points. So I live in Singapore, where you'll see reflexology parlors, which are kind of places that rub your feet. And the thinking in Chinese culture is that if this is your foot, the different portions, if you rub here, this actually will affect your bowel system. If you rub here, it will affect your neck. So my mom,
I don't think rubbing is the right word, Dan, honestly.
yes, it is. It can be, certainly the first time it is intense. But even actually a little bit of pressure, I find, is enough to kind of change things. So I've experienced those since growing up, because my mom kind of would take me along when she went. As an expat brat, moving around Asia, you find these places everywhere. They are, again, incredibly effective. You go in jet lagged and with a bit of a hangover and a headache, and through that intervention, which again seems completely irrational, that something so localized could affect the whole body.
Sure.
And then that kind of leads you kind of know it's always there. And then one day I just a few years ago, I had a headache. So I kind of Googled acupressure points for headache. And this, I mean, if listeners take away anything, I think this is so incredibly useful. I tell everyone, and as in so many cases, people kind of don't really do it. But if you have a headache, this little webby part of your hand here, you massage that. When you have a headache, you can feel the knots within there. You massage each one of those quite hard for about 30 seconds each. Then actually most of the time, like the headache will be 80% gone. And again, that in this time of so many claims of clickbait, it's so easy to feel that these things are just kind of not true, and just for the clicks. But again, these are interventions that they don't cost anything. So I kind of, the reason I think I'm so willing to try something like TRE is just, if it's a low-cost intervention, why not try? My body is far from a temple, but I think you can see it a little bit as an experimentation lab of, what are techniques that, in a time when everyone is suffering from stress and anxiety, difficulty sleeping, overwork, what works for you? The acupressure was on one of those. Another thing that I think just kind of helps, because with TRE, I think you need to be physically open as well as mentally, which we could talk about later. But helps me open that kind of mental openness was another phenomenon which has kind of been simmering for years and has gained fire only about 10 years ago. But since I was a child, I experienced what was not yet then known as ASMR, which is the autonomous sensory meridian response, which is a very scientific name that was only made up by someone, a non-scientist, I believe, about 10, 15 years ago, for something that I think people have experienced for ages, and they just would call it, the tingles. And what it is this very interesting response to often audio, but sometimes just personal attention. Your parent kind of stroking your neck as a child when you go to sleep. And it's this incredibly intense sensation of tingles. And even some people call it a kind of head orgasm, which again, it's not a sexual thing at all. It's just a all over body feeling of very calming tingles that I think it's almost like whether you can roll your tongue or not. Some people experience it.
Right.
Do not. It's something like maybe 1 in 5 do. And it did not have a name until about 10, 15 years ago. And now if you look on YouTube, it is everywhere. There's a global phenomenon. Brands have jumped on it. The ASM artists, as they are called, they see millions of hits and subscribers. And again, this was just something where you kind of have to be receptive to these things a little bit, I think. And if you are, then it just shows what your body is kind of capable of. I had no idea that this was something that can help. And similarly to TRE, I think after a session of ASMR, which for most people, you are then able to kind of turn it on or off, or, yes, I need to experience some tingles now.
Right.
It kind of has that same effect of just kind of calming and centering and allowing you to sleep better. And they've done studies on it now. It lowers your blood pressure and all that jazz. So these were stepping stones, I think, that allowed me to kind of be ready as a kind of, I'm very into science and what works, and is this actually a claim that works? So to then come to TRE is something that is such a dramatic in terms of its look, modality, and just be ready for, as a consumer, as a practitioner, as an interested party. So that's the very long story.
Yeah. No, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. When you first did, what do you remember about your first TRE session? It said that it sounded like within a couple of tries following a YouTube video, you were able to stimulate the neurogenic tremor reflex successfully. But what do you, what do you remember about that?
Yeah, so funnily enough, I journal off and on, and I looked at my old ones to see if I could find anything. So this is my entry from Thursday, 20th of February, 2024. So I can ping the date, which is nice.
Nice.
Wait, sorry, no, hold fire. That is when I said did TRE again today. Okay, Wednesday, 19th February. Tried TRE, brackets, trauma tension release exercises, where you basically exhaust the muscles till they shake uncontrollably, and it works, exclamation mark. Good to know. Of course, afterwards I was exhausted.
Right.
Then a week after, I did TRE again today, and man, is it dramatic and effective. Whole body quivers and judders about like you're having a fit. And then interesting side modality, that plus Tai Chi, which I had just kind of started exploring.
Yeah.
Interesting week for body awareness. Had a real meditative sense of presence and calm after the TRE. Should it be a daily thing? Question mark. So it's interesting to kind of look back on all of that. I think so. That was kind of my fairly unpoetic way of just instant response. In terms of what I remember from the experience, I think it was fascinating how it kind of made me think of laughter a little bit, just as a physical response that is kind of controllable and not controllable and very similar all over fakes, and you need to really give yourself to that experience and
Sure.
Because if an alien came to Earth and saw someone laughing, you'd think there's this horrible thing, this corpus is losing control, what's happening.
Right.
And an interesting connection, actually, which I then read about a few days later, was these were the first couple sessions. I think by the third, fourth, I had an experience where I finished my TRE, was sitting on the couch, and then I guess it was kind of still going, the neurogenic response.
Sure.
And I started to kind of breathe very deeply, and not in an unpleasant way at all. And again, it's that mental state of, okay, this is interesting. I'm going to observe this. What's happening? And I started to just kind of laugh. And I guess it was kind of that the body just kind of releasing that extra burst of tension. So really fascinating, and just kind of viewing something that I had never heard of. And I think when you've never heard of something and it has such a dramatic response, you're almost angry at the world. Like, why have I never heard of this? Why is this not being taught in schools?
Right. Yeah, super interesting. Okay, I'm going to stay on my line. I have thoughts, but I'm going to pursue my line of questioning here. So, remind me to come back. I want to talk about the laughing. There's a few things I'm bookmarking in my mind here. But so you were kind of, you were definitely having a response. You were curious, is what I'm hearing. And then what? You stuck with it, or it became something intermittent, or yeah, what you had written
I
the
think
question, can I do this every day? Like what happened? What happened then?
I think it very quickly became not daily, but certainly multiple times a week, and interesting to kind of see when I'm completely, very relaxed week, I'm on holiday or whatever. It kind of is. It's almost like the body is saying, "Yeah, okay, great," but you don't really need it. And
Right.
then when I'm super stressed, I'm under deadline, I have a tough meeting coming up or something, I found the quality of the tremors is even more intense. Um, and I think the first few sessions, weirdly, were longer. They were 10, 15 minutes. Now, actually, I find that they don't last for more than 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so I guess this would be the first of my journalistic questions for you is in terms of the responses that you see when you're teaching,
Sure.
is there a correlation for the most part on average between um, the amount of stress that is kind of built up in a person's system and needs to be released? If there is a lot of it that tend to be kind of more intensive shakes, is there a correlation there?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And there's some nuance here, but on average, yes. So if somebody who's in, well, either there's a buildup of stress, which also might have a correlate to muscular tension, sort of having a baseline of, chronic muscle tension. When we're in a more, when there is that condition, and when somebody's stressed, one way to look at it is they're running a little bit more into their sympathetic or fight or flight nervous system. So yes, when there's more stress physiology taking place, then on average the tremoring is going to be faster, more dynamic, having bigger movements potentially, or just a sense of more action. Oftentimes, like you're saying on vacation, maybe I don't need it. I'm on vacation, or it's a rest day. But if you were to do it on a vacation and you were in a less stressed physiology, my guess is you could definitely still tremor, maybe even quite successfully and interestingly. But there's a good chance it would have a softer quality, that it would not be quite as high energy. And also, if you take somebody who begins because they're using it for stress or sort of tension release purposes, and then they stay with it with some consistency over time, on average, what you're going to be seeing is what was originally like pretty, kind of full movements, maybe even a lot of heat coming from the body. These are more sympathetic responses. Um, we would tend you would expect to see sort of a mellowing, a softening over time as somebody's sort of nervous system set point sort of
Mm.
shifted into a less baseline stress physiology.
Yeah, interesting.
So, yeah, yeah, cool. Well, so okay, so this was it was February of 2024. You found it. You started using it a little bit, and is it like so now it's a little more than a year later? Is it kind of the same? It's like it's sort of it's an as need practice. It's like when you can sort of feel it. You're under deadline. You're under stress. You can kind of tell when it would feel good to do. Is that how you use it now?
Yeah, totally. And I talked a little bit about kind of just having almost a toolbox
Yeah.
things, and I think it's so useful to have not just one thing to rely on, because then if you only have a hammer, every task needs a
Everything's
hammer.
a nail. Yep.
Everything's a nail. So it's been interesting. Looking back on my journals, it was interesting to see that I kind of immediately said that it's interesting to pair it with Tai Chi. Tai Chi, because again, there's a lot to learn there. That one was something that I kind of did a few YouTube videos. I haven't done any classes yet, and I really should.
Right.
So I think I started then and then kind of let that go. Recently, just in the past month, I've actually started doing Tai Chi every day, touch wood. Let's
Right.
talk again in a month if I continue the streak. And it's interesting to Sometimes pair those things in the morning, but also just mentally to kind of, again, just kind of sit and have the time and examine and say, well, what are these things doing for me? And for me, TRE is, these might be blunt metaphors, but it's what springs to mind. TRE is the kind of burst of flame, very external. And literally that's what my hands will do. This movement, almost just like clear, out.
Yeah.
Tai Chi is, and obviously that's, there's kind of fast, and these are the movements, right? So it's kind of almost similar to that flame again. It's very kind of frenetic.
Right.
Although internally, obviously, again, and this is what's so fascinating about TRE, is that the body is absolutely like this, but inside you're just observing, and it's great. And I find that kind of so fascinating about about kind of how it presents itself. Whereas Tai Chi, if TRE is that kind of outward speed, TRE is that kind of, and these are words that people use all the time, right? So, gentle, flowing, internal, meditative.
Sure.
And the feeling after Tai Chi then is this kind of sense, and again, it's used all the time. People always say, I feel centered, I feel calm. After TRE, I feel spent is probably not the right word, but it's kind of almost, when you come back from a run and you just kind of feel like, it's that sigh of, things have been released. So those are two things. And then, again, just other things to talk about in terms of lifestyle interventions that really help me. I'm Swedish, so I've over the relationship with my wife, over the years, I have pulled her into the orbit of saunas.
Okay. I was hoping that's what you were about to say. Yeah, good.
Yeah, where was that sentence going to end? Saunas and cold plunge.
Sure.
And she has now kind of said this is absolutely amazing. Again, it's such a kind of simple, you wouldn't even call it a technique, but again, just kind of allowing the muscles to relax from the heat, and then just the endorphin hit to the nervous system of that coldness. So that's a regular intervention as well. I mentioned the acupressure, things like box breathing, which I don't know if you've heard of. So it's again,
kind of breathing in and then a retention, and then exhale and a retention. Yeah.
So that's the short list of things. I would say using those kind of as and when, sometimes pairing one with the other. Obviously, I think making sure that you're not relying on one too much, and just kind of having that peace of mind that when life hands you lemons, you can make TRE lemonade. Yeah.
Nice. In the email that you wrote, you shared a few things that you felt you attributed to your TRE experience once you had gotten started. I think you mentioned you made that connection to ASMR and that sensitivity, and I think you even commented that in some ways that intensified following TRE. And then a couple of the other things you mentioned, if memory serves, were, let's see, something about being a bit more sensitive to music. So I'd like to hear what that was. Standing up taller, that's one we hear quite a bit. So I want to hear that version for you. I don't know what else, and I'm not sure what else you might have shared, but yeah. But in terms of, that sensitivity piece, whether that was around ASMR or to music, share a little bit about what you noticed with that.
Yeah, I think that was fairly short-lived, and I guess be interesting to learn from you whether everyone kind of has their own honeymoon period where,
Right.
Similarly to after you go to the chiro or you have a massage after something, you kind of, I do feel like the sensory input from the world, everyone is going to have something where it's almost something they've been ignoring because they've been so stressful and inward-looking or something like that. But yeah, music was one of them, and just kind of weirdly, connecting emotionally to songs that I had kind of not really cared about before. There's always that track that you skip in your favorite album, and then suddenly, and it was quite dramatic because songs that you just really don't like, and then suddenly you're hearing it the day or an hour after your second TRE session. And it's like, wow. And whether that, I don't know, is just kind of the endorphins of the joy of discovering something new, and you know that this is going to be something really useful for you, you're in a better frame of mind. And you know that kind of monkey mind has been silenced a little bit, and you're just a bit more kind of appreciative and able to connect with the kind of the senses of the world. I would imagine it's probably very deeply tied then to the fact that I was standing stronger, and just this simple thing of, you know, the diaphragm now has more air. My spine isn't kind of like creaking like a 8-year-old. So again, it's just interesting how these dots suddenly get connected. You know, these things that should be happening and how your kind of daily life could be. TRE, I guess, is kind of that thread that knits them together, at least for me.
Yeah, yeah, super cool. Well, on that theme of sort of standing taller, I think you're onto something with that. Just even postural. I mean, are the sort of the way we teach it in TRE is that part of what we believe TRE is doing is it's undoing our stress physiology, which sort of has a neurohormonal, neurological component to it, but posturally it does too. So when we are in stress and you know, everybody knows that, most people know that when they're stressed, their shoulders get more tight. Maybe they notice that their jaw gets more tight, but very rarely is the muscle changes going to be as local as just that. So a more complete summary of what gets involved in when we're in more of a chronic fight or flight state or stress physiology in general is that very typically we're going to move into a more anterior posture. And so very often that's the diaphragm tightening, lower down. It's the deep core, the psoas muscles creating a tightening. And even before I did this work, when my work was as a structural integration bodywork therapist, where we did a lot of work deep in the pelvis and the core and this and that. And I would always make the comment, we all know our shoulders get tight, but if your shoulders are tight, you're almost for sure your psoas is responding to stress in that same way too, and your diaphragm and all of these things. So our explanation is that when we are, we believe that the neurogenic tremor process is, in a sense, the completion phase of stress physiology. It's the inborn biological mechanism that is intended to transition from I've been activated because due to some sort of stress, that threat detection is no longer there. Now there is a biological pathway towards undoing protective or physiological responses, including that muscle tone. So kind of we can lengthen the psoas, we can release the diaphragm, like happened with your, you know, when you made the comment about laughing and crying are so common experiences with TRE, sometimes during the tremoring, sometimes coming afterwards where things are kind of rippling through. But yeah, all of those go along with sort of returning us to a more upright state. And as you made the comment, when we're more upright, just even neurohormonally, there's a change. We tend to be a little bit more upbeat. There's sort of mood shifts that are associated with posture. So these things all really link together in interesting ways.
You talked a bit then about those kind of the kind of internal sort of, you know, pelvic diaphragm. And I'm going to ask a cheeky question because it will hopefully help my practice.
Go on.
You can charge me for the mini lesson after.
Okay, I will.
Yeah, because I think in terms of, and again, it's useful, it's interesting how you find this practice and it just helps you pay more attention to your body, right, and where the stress is. And I think for me, a lot of it is in this solar plexus diaphragm area,
right,
which, you know, for me, I find that certainly, you know, for the limbs, the hips, these kind of, I guess, almost kind of broad battlefields, you might call them, are very easy because they're so flexible. What is your sense of how those tremors can kind of be invited just more into the core, into the diaphragm, these things that don't necessarily kind of shift as much? So
they don't move as easily. They're not like limbs that move as much. Yeah, very common. So lots of different strategies, but I'll tell you my favorite, or at least the initial versions I would go to. To me, a lot of it is with the use of your own breath and oftentimes the use of your own touch. So the way that I would facilitate probably is sort of getting the tremoring process going. And I would invite you to literally just rest your hands on any place where you feel that your breathing has any restriction. And we can't just immediately shift where our breath has a constriction, but even touch alone tends to, in a sense, bring more of the sort of awareness of an area. So already, even laying hands on different parts of your body itself is likely to have an influence on how the tremoring is moving through you.
Yeah,
But then in terms of inviting breath, so I like having hands sort of as a reference, because now you can breathe into it. And I use an image sometimes with my clients. I say, okay, imagine your hands are resting gently on sometimes it's the chest where it needs this, sometimes it's the solar plexus, sometimes it's the lower abdomen. This same idea could be used anywhere where there's not as much freedom of expansion to the breath, is laying the hands there and then using your in-breath to gently, to literally feel that you're raising your hands towards the ceiling. And the analogy I sometimes use is the tide coming in and the boat is being lifted by the rising tide. And then on the exhalation, releasing in a way that you can literally feel your hand, not pushing or anything like that. And oftentimes working in cycles of 3. So maybe you would, or 2, 3, something like that. So if you were laying down tremoring right now and you're noticing that, yeah, I got a lot of movement, but I can just sense that this area could be more open. That's where I would start. I would have you rest your hands there, see what changes happen even just from that, and then start to work with little cycles, not like 10 minutes or anything, just 2 or 3 breaths where you're really inviting as much expansion and then release, and then letting it go, letting the body reorganize. In a sense, it's like, how did you take that in? And then repeating that a few times. That would be sort of my number one approach. There's other things too, like you could potentially do like a little bit of rotation. That might, like if you kind of did a self-hug and then let your spine roll a little bit left and right, that might sort of start to work your rib cage and thus your diaphragm. We could get fancy. You could take a rolled up towel and put it underneath your back, manually creating a little bit of an arch. That might support sort of something opening up. So it would depend upon the particulars, but those are some of the things that we might play with to see if we could. But working with the intention of breath, in some ways, I get the best results from that.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
It's so, when you're in this kind of space, I think of discovering a new, it's cheesy to say something that literally broadens your horizons. It's interesting how the connections happen, because you said, think of kind of the boat rising.
Right.
And interestingly, for another project recently, and slightly for myself as well, I kind of created a sort of an acronym for myself, just to kind of always to return to when I am hyper stressed 5 minutes before a meeting or something, and that acronym is BOAT. So B for box breathing, O for observing mindfully, A for asking yourself, okay, I'm stressed about this meeting. I had a meeting 3 months ago, very similar to this. Am I still stressed about that? No.
Right.
And it's just that ability to mentally reframe. So, and then T, interestingly, in this case, is not TRE, but top 3 tasks. This just prioritizing. This is the action points that I need. So yeah, it's just funny when you start to kind of, now that BOAT also for me, just as a reminder, can be okay. That's how I should be treating my breath for this particular thing. It's just any way I think you find that you can kind of use these mnemonics, kind of
little cues. Yep.
Cues. Yeah.
That's so cool. Awesome. Well, maybe we could weave in some, there's things I've been reflecting on as I've heard you're sharing. Maybe I'll comment on one of those, but then why don't we do a little back and forth? Maybe there's some of your questions that you want to bring in. The one comment that as you were sharing, I'm going to refresh my own memory here. It was about the sort of the reframe, or this. You mentioned kind of the branding language of inviting tremors. And I think there is something really important there, because I think that was actually probably what I think of as Dr. Berceli's sort of key insight, was that he was in these really stressful situations. He was sort of working in war zones and things like that, and he was seeing a lot of people respond to stress, like mortar shelling and things like that. And he himself was subject to it. And he almost developed, I'm not going to quite use the word dark humor, but he is a little bit funny the way he talks about it, because he'll say, you get so used to being in a bomb shelter and the bombs are going, shelling is going off. And he said he started to kind of observe how people would go into their sort of protective response, and it became almost a little bit funny to him that, like, whether they were Muslim or Jewish or old or young or what language they spoke, it was, if you were watching, it was as though this was a rehearsed, everybody was on the, in perfect timing doing the same movement. And then as he noticed, kids would tremor more easily, sometimes adults would, sometimes he would try to stop it. And I think the big sort of shift he started to make was, what if what if this isn't just a side effect of fear, which is the way it's commonly looked at societally, shaking with fear as sort of a concept, or what if this isn't, or even if as he started to become more curious and he looked at the medical research, almost all references in medical or psychological literature to tremoring, they're never about the therapeutic fact, or a term I've learned since, receptive. They're always linked to a pathology. Sometimes it's neurodegenerative, like with Parkinson's disease. Sometimes it's connected to general anxiety, things like that. But so I think his big shift was, hey, maybe the sure, there is a negative context here. There's scary things going on, but maybe the shaking itself isn't just a random side effect. Maybe there's something positive there. And then, to me, the next step of that is, what if you invite, using your word, what if you invite this response not in a scary context, not because a bomb just went off, not because, but actually in relative calm or safety? Then if you invite it, then what happens? And very often it's a very positive downshift, downregulation, opening up musculoskeletally, sometimes opening up psychoemotionally, in these ways that you've referenced a little bit for yourself. So that shift from tremor as pathology to something to be solicited, I think is a really important one.
Yeah, I was listening to a podcast, I think it was just yesterday, around Tai Chi and its kind of effects. And sadly, I can't remember the exact speaker, but he had a really powerful phrase where for him, and he studied it, he practiced it, and for him, he framed it, Tai Chi, as dissolving the hyphen between mind-body, which I think is a fascinating way to look at it. And it applies to so many things, TRE one of them, where that word invite is doing so much work for us to see something that we are taught from childhood and in every Hollywood movie. If you tremble, you're a wimp. If you're trembling, it's something to be gotten rid of, and go to a doctor, get a shot, whatever. So reframing that into something that, and maybe that's why my first session made me think of laughter. The laughter is exactly the same. We are trembling uncontrollably, and we absolutely welcome that. So yeah, I mean, the word invite, the word reframe, they're so powerful if you can kind of understand what is happening. Yeah.
Yeah, very cool.
One question I had.
Yeah, go ahead.
And then how kind of Dr. Berceli started to develop this. And as a journalist, I'm always interested in the kind of story, both how a particular modality is created, but also just like is there a larger cultural context here? And I was trying to find other, ancient histories, shamanic rites, Eastern kind of thinking, where kind of people throughout the past have maybe understood that trembling can be a good thing and can then actually have kind of health benefits. I haven't found anything yet, but I was curious to see whether that's been kind of as part of your
Yeah,
deeper
yeah.
understanding
No,
of
it's a good question, and there definitely is there are a lot of historical examples and precedents, both indigenously East-West, and also to some extent through some other more recent Western modalities. So, and I'm not an expert on the indigenous side of it. There's a book called Shaking Medicine that goes into that history a bit. I'm forgetting the guy's name. It's like Brad Keeney or something like that, who has done a little bit of an anthropological look at um, uh, tremoring as a component of indigenous practices. There's also a friend and colleague of mine is a physical therapist who in uh, East Coast of the United States, and he and a team did a cool article for bodywork literature. I forget the journal exactly, but his field of manual therapy, and this is where I got this term receptive, which is that which is that. But their paper was basically saying, look, spontaneous movement and tremoring comes up a lot. It comes up in various modalities. It comes up in bodywork therapies. There's historical examples like they reference a few like a Kalahari Bush tribe where shaking as an ecstatic practice is common. I believe there's a Qigong lineage, or probably multiple actually, where made so voluntary shaking is definitely part of qigong, but then I think there are some where there's an involuntary component as well. The shaker tradition in the United States, sort of a derivative of Quaker, that this was a religious practice where literally they had shaking as a component of it. So these are sort of more on the religious or indigenous side. Anyway, my colleague Joel, there's some, I'm thinking they have good references for that in that paper, which I'll send to you.
amazing.
But but then on the Western side of things, the Wilhelm Reich is sort of considered the founder, grandfather of sort of Western body psychotherapy. He kind of developed this concept of body armor, and he kind of had his own theories around sort of an energy medicine perspective, referring to body energy as orgone, and kind of had some therapeutic techniques. And then a successor of his, Alexander Lowen, developed something called bioenergetics. And in bioenergetics, tremoring is a component of that. And somewhere along Dr. Berceli's journey, he got curious, I think after he was observing all of this, and then seeing that that was a part of this body psychotherapy program. So he trained and certified that new Alexander Lowen. Alexander Lowen was sort of very supportive of the direction that Dr. Berceli was taking things. And then in a few other Western trauma modalities, like one that I'm trained in, for example, is somatic experiencing. And there's some related, or like in EMDR, these are sort of modern trauma therapies. And tremoring will often show up organically, not stimulated intentionally the way that we do in TRE, but as a component, as somebody goes through a processing around a trauma from a body-based approach. Very often tremoring happens, and that's also very much true in the bodywork world and the acupuncture world, whereas any bodywork or acupuncturist who's worked on a lot of people, this was I won't go into it right now, but that's my own origin story. That's how I got curious about it. It happened to me, and then I started seeing it in other people so often in a bodywork setting. What the heck is this shaking that happens, that they can stop it, but if they let it go, it actually sort of blossoms into a kind of a releasing experience. So I think the short answer is yes. I don't think Dr. Berceli definitely didn't invent something new. I mean, the idea is if this is sort of part of our evolutionary biology that we share with all mammals, it would stand to reason that that this would not be the only way that this is being accessed. But why is it not more known? Why is it still sort of, why is it, yeah, so niche? Not sure. I'm curious about that.
Yeah, and it's fascinating. I mean, coming from a kind of marketing background, it's interesting these things. What it takes for them to catch light or not. And sometimes it's really just in the ether. I mentioned ASMR, and it's similar to what you just said. This kind of tingling sensation has no doubt been around for as long as human civilization has been around.
Right.
And I remember growing up, asking friends about this in the 90s. Do you have this? No. What are you even talking about? And I'm like, yes, I have it too. But I mean, it doesn't have what it? Huh? What is
What
it?
is that? Yeah.
And, and I would in university just before it even got a term. Then it started to catch light because I was searching for it, and then people would say tingling video, whisper video. But it took that branding, I think.
Yeah.
For it to catch light. And I'm now asking the same questions of TRE a little bit. It has the branding. I'm fascinated about how it's being used by, to treat refugees in the military.
Sure.
But yeah, it's not there yet. It hasn't become the new ice
The
plunge.
new cold plunging. Yeah.
Yeah.
You had asked before we hit record, that maybe you would bring this up, and I don't know for sure either. When is something going to explode or sort of into the sort of popular consciousness or zeitgeist? But my intuition is that we're moving in that direction, and I don't know if it will be at the same level that we see cold plunging and this and that. But the example that I commonly use is breathwork. In that 10 years ago, if you had done a Google search for breathwork class, breathwork training, breathwork certification, that's probably at the very beginning of when Wim Hof was, and his breathwork was becoming well known. But there would not be a lot. There would only be a little bit, and then around 2020, 2021, James Nestor's book came out, Breathe, and then suddenly people became much more interested in a lot of this always goes into athletics, and I actually think TRE might really take off in athletic circles.
Yeah.
But no, so like with breathwork, and I think there's been a major proliferation of it, and breathwork was certainly popular in yoga classes and pranayama, but again, it just sort of really exploded in the last 10 years, and even especially the last 5 years. I have this hunch that tremoring is going to be similar. I'm not certain that it's going to be exclusively in the sort of the TRE domain. I sort of watch the space through social media, Instagram, things like that. And there are other tremoring modalities that seem to have been that there's a person, Keith Moats, I think is his name. He has a community of tremoring practice. They approach it a little bit differently, but with a lot of overlap. So I have this hunch that, like right now, if you did a YouTube search around why is my body shaking and tremoring, you're going to find YouTube videos probably about TRE. I have this feeling that maybe in 5 or 10 years, it will be more known and maybe a little bit more diversified across different sort of groups and modalities.
Yeah, and sometimes it's the unfortunate thing that you kind of just need a critical mass of need, and we're already in the age of anxiety. But read any headline, and things are going to get a lot more stressful and unpredictable for people around the world in so many different ways. So just the search for a technique is certainly going to go up and up.
Yeah, for sure. But to me, what I think will be the success of tremoring as an approach is the fact that it can, to me, it sort of has the ingredients of sort of spreading or virality, and not virality because just for the fun of it or for the marketing boost, But if it's effective, it has the right ingredients for spreading because it can be pretty easily taught and learned, just in the same way you found it on a YouTube video, you showed your wife. So it can sort of spread word of mouth that way. That has very much been part of Dr. Berceli's hope around it, was that, he's a clinical social worker. He could have developed this and said, look, only psychotherapists can learn this because it's about trauma. But actually, he went the opposite direction. I mean, there's a lot of psychotherapists who learn it, don't get me wrong. But he kind of went the opposite direction. He said, look, about 90% of the world's population does not have access to psychotherapy in the way that we typically would. The reason this was so effective I'm paraphrasing David right now, the reason this was so effective when he was living in Lebanon, South Sudan, these different places, was not because one-on-one he worked with people like a psychotherapist, but because he taught groups, he sometimes taught families, he sometimes taught groups that loved it and continued and did it on their own when he was going to travel somewhere else. So it's those things that make it move. An example in my world right now is I've got a cool opportunity this year where there's a group of Catholic missionary sisters, nuns, who live in Ireland, but their mission work is around the world. A lot of it is in Africa, and already they've known about TRE for about 10 years. They use it here and there, but they finally decided, hey, listen, we as the sort of leadership team, let's get trained up, let's learn this, and then let's sort of systematically try to spread this through our community. So I'm working with these 6 people to train them as facilitators within their context, and then now they're going to start to propagate it through the different missionaries. And another example of that, on that sort of spreading phenomenon, is with the New York Fire Department. So about 18 months ago, we had a cohort of about 10 people or so who somebody had found it. He was a body worker. He said, this is cool. The fitness unit in the Fire Department Academy said, yeah, let's learn that. We're into breathwork. We're into other stuff. What's this? Dr. Berceli went out there. He did an initial training. They loved it. And then this cohort of guys, especially there's 3 or 4 who've ended up forming this little team. They have now, it's baked into for the new firemen recruits. They go through their 10-week training. They do TRE consistently, hundreds of them at a time.
Amazing.
They're now traveling to fire departments around the United States because they're saying, look, you guys should be incorporating this. So that's an example. Look, we only had to train these few people and get them interested enough, and then now they are doing that spreading on their own. So to me, when I look at examples like that, I believe that there's very much the likelihood, I think, that we're going to see more of a spreading of this in the coming years.
Yeah, and it makes me think of, for some reason, kind of what happened culturally in the health world after World War I. Right. You were mentioning a bit about PTSD, and you watch these now that AI can kind of smooth the frame rate. I'm not sure why, whether I was researching a story, but looking at videos from 1918 of shell-shocked soldiers.
Oh wow!
And the trembles that they had. Right. And how essentially, suddenly Western Europe was flooded with millions of men who kind of needed this help. And then I think from those modalities, then came a complete change in restorative plastic surgery. A completely new field is developed because it's needed. The Alexander technique of kind of centering your body, I believe that came out of the trenches of World War I as well.
Interesting. I didn't know that history. Yeah.
I believe so. I mean, I might be wrong, but I think certainly World War I is seen as this time where a mass problem dictated the need for solutions. And again, coming back to that slightly pessimistic worldview of conflict happening all over the world, millions of civilians and soldiers and everyone in between are kind of going to need to discover these ways that can help themselves. But I think I mentioned World War I as well because it kind of leads me to a question, and you talked about it a little bit, of and certainly with shell shock, that uncontrollable trembling is such a key symptom. But what separates them? Because they're trembling, but they're not experiencing the kind of release and relief.
Right.
So is that again about this hyphen between body and mind? It's because the tremors, I guess, are seen as a symptom. So mentally, it's the kind of emotional release that is needed, that positivity, is not happening because of the mind cycle. Or what's your thinking on what's going on there?
Yeah, my thinking in that example is that the tremors that they're displaying are very much the evidence that the body is seeking a discharge. Let's just use that word, and it's showing that through these movements and tremors. The people, they don't have the understanding or awareness. On the one hand, they certainly might be the likelihood of trying to sort of suppress it, because they're viewing it as a symptom rather than as the beginning of something that might be a resolution. So one of it is part of it would be the mental attitude, but two, it's then the not is what these soldiers would find if they were to. Probably this would be best if they had support, because a supporting person can create a lot of safety and containment. But could show them that actually if they follow that, if they stay curious, if they give permission to it, and if they, instead of inhibiting it, it's likely to, on the one hand, increase, and they might even go into a little bit of a, they might orient towards some of the stress and that they had experienced. They might even they might go into memory associated to their shell shock. They might go into stress physiology in a sense, their nervous system orienting back to the conditions that initiated this, which isn't comfortable necessarily. But if that can be supported and stretched out, so to me, one of the good news is about trauma resolution in general and TRE specifically, is that to me, a good news is we don't have to do everything all at once. There's this principle of titration, this idea that we can break things into more digestible units of processing, such that we can do it. It feels doable. Yeah, maybe there's some activation energy, but it's not overwhelming. In a sense, we can live to do another tremor, rather than, do it once and it's so scary that we don't want to do it again. So especially when we're using it for trauma, our idea is can we help the person first reframe it that it's the body trying to help them. Two, they don't have to do it all at once, and that if they're willing, if there's a little bit of a leap of faith involved, that they can, in a sense, trust their body. That may well lead to not just the compulsive repetition of their tremoring, but a more of a completion or a discharge, which is what we would be looking for.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
So do you face, when you, I guess, either tell, your social circle or people you meet what you do, or maybe a new kind of client comes in, how often is there kind of still this in-baked resistance, maybe? Like, people are coming to you because they want the results, but there is this maybe sense of a mental lock of, releasing control, and kind of, again, that reframe, the ability to invite something that feels negative.
Yeah, it's a good comment. I mean, I sort of have two categories of people. I have people who may have heard about it, and in fact they're coming to me because they've either tried it or they've heard about it. There's some curiosity. So those people are going to be, already on the receptive side of things. They've maybe bought into this idea that there's a neurobiological process. There's an analogy to the animal world where we see this kinds of tremoring and discharge happening. So those people are going to be definitely more receptive. Other people, I am educating them about that, but I don't know. My style is, I say, by the way, TRE isn't the only tool that I use, so I usually am kind of explaining a little bit the collection of approaches that I use. And when I get to TRE, I say, well, this one's a little bit strange, but let me tell you about it. So I just sort of say that right out the bat. And I say what's strange about it is it's a physical process, something that I'm going to actually show you how to do or guide you in. And what's weird about it is after we do sort of a relaxation, kind of a getting into the body breathing thing, I'm going to take you through a sequence of movements, and the result of that is your body's going to start to have a little bit of a tremble or a tremor. And it's not the kind of, you could stop it. It's not like you can't stop it once we get it started. And in fact, I'm going to show you that we can turn on this, what's called the neurogenic tremor reflex. What I would do is I'd show you that we can activate this process and we can work with it and self-regulate it. And then I go into the psycho a little bit. Well, what this tremor reflex is it's a process that our body uses to downshift out of stress physiology. And so I just kind of state that as a fact, because in my view it is a fact. And I oftentimes, once in a while, somebody says, that doesn't sound like it's for me, but most often not. Most people are curious and they want to give it a try, and then they do, and they realize that it's interesting. And in my experiences, for some people, right away it's sort of like, wow, this is like a big aha, and this was like my body wanted to do this. This was the thing I've been waiting for. I didn't even realize it. And so sometimes it's like this like total eureka situation, which is always cool. That's very fun to facilitate when that's the situation. And other times it's not as dramatic as all of that. It's more of a curiosity. It's a novelty. My goal with any first session is sort of like, I want to get them curious enough and have it be not have anything negative happen, such that they would be willing to try it again. Because in my view, like coming back to your wife, for example, my goal always is like, I don't care. The starting point, I don't care. Somebody can be skeptical. They can be, all of those things are fine. In my experience, if you can keep their buy-in for a couple of sessions, in 99.9% of instances, we can kind of lead somebody into that, yes, they too have that neurogenic tremor reflex. They can activate it, and it might be very interesting and meaningful for them. So, yeah, that's a little bit how I frame it.
Yeah. And do you find that there are, I talked a little about how I kind of pair it with various things. Are there other modalities, or just kind of in terms of a session, that you find are particularly useful to start or end a TRE session with, whether that's, I don't know, meditating or going for a run? Are there kind of, couplings that you find really embed the feeling, or, change the way you feel throughout the day, even just on a personal basis, I guess?
Definitely. Like that's actually like a big zone of inquiry for me right now, is this sort of the sense of pairing or coupling. So yeah, let me answer this two ways. First, I'll come back to the main question, but I'm gonna rewind the tape a little bit. So for me, when I first became curious about this, the first reason was a personal one, that a couple times when I had gone through a Rolfing structural integration bodywork session, I had big spontaneous shakes and releases that were sort of stimulated by the bodywork, that I could tell were really significant for me, but nobody could explain what. They didn't have any language around the nervous system, so it was like a mystery experience. And so, and then later, that was my first therapeutic work, was doing structural integration bodywork, and I would see the same thing. So initially, my sort of curiosity was sort of both personal and professional, because I saw it happening in those environments, and I thought it was so cool that instead of just waiting for the stars to align when like this type of thing would just happen organically, that actually there's a methodology to cultivate it and to work with it. So that was kind of an original context. But then the next, so I kind of did that, but in my sort of my professional work, it was like working in the bodywork setting. But on the more personal side, I was very active in a Zen meditation community. I still am, but I was more active in sort of participating in retreats and helping with beginner meditation retreats and things like that. And so I started playing around with it in those settings. And even for me, like if I was doing a 7-day meditation intensive on the downtime or like at night before, I would spend a lot of time tremoring. And my experience was that a little bit helped me physically because spending times in spending a lot of time sitting, your body can get stiff and achy. So that was probably my original inspiration. But then I also started to feel that the tremoring actually supported my meditative process. That over the course of a week of sitting, like I'm using a retreat as an example, I found that tremoring often sort of led me down the pathway of sort of kind of quieting the outer world and also my sort of body rebelling against the sitting posture. I just found that it was kind of like an accelerator. And then with students, so we did this work for a while. This is part of an organization called the Institute for Zen Leadership, which was basically working with business leaders and then introducing breathing and Zen meditation was sort of a part of the curriculum by this woman, Ginny Whitelaw in the United States. So I was kind of assisting in those things, and so we would have these retreats where it was like 3-4 days. People would come in. Very often, this was their beginning meditation experience. It might be new for them, and on the first night, we would do a group TRE session, or maybe every night or something like that. And what we learned pretty quickly was that it was like it created a shift very quickly. That after that, that people would say like, "Wow, now I'm like really here." I was still, part of me was still on the airplane or back at home with my family, but all right, now I'm really sort of here with you. Or people would say, we kind of do a little circle of sharing or something. They'd say, I can't. Earlier I felt like sort of an individual. I didn't know all of you. Now even though I don't really know all of you that much better, I somehow feel like in connection, or I'm now part of this group. Little comments like that sort of told us, okay, so that's interesting. And then in general, we felt that it in the 3 or 4 days of, this was sort of new for them to be meditating, we felt that adding this in got people that that mind-body connection, sort of just picked it up much more quickly, and I don't know, it worked really well. So that's sort of one example of a pairing. I think that tremoring has a massive application in meditative communities, and we're seeing that sort of Vipassana communities are sometimes really. So there's a handful of TRE people around the world who are, kind of really exploring that particular angle. But these days, what I'm so interested in is, what can support tremoring going deeper? Because in my experience, there's sort of a beginning phase of tremoring when it's new and your body's doing it, and that's great. But I've gotten interested in like, well, all right, you already know how to tremor. Like, well, is there any value in it? Is there any value in it beyond just, okay, I'm stressed because I've got a deadline and now I'm less stressed? Is there anything further than that potentially? And I believe that there is. And starting in the pandemic in 2020, when that all happened, my first instinct was there's not a lot I can do about this, but I can do online Zoom classes and just invite anybody who wants to tremor. So I started a group. It was daily for most of into 2021. It was sort of just a morning group, and it became a very international group of people who just, not everybody came every day, but it was just sort of a daily tremor session. And I kept that going since then, but not every day. But now over time, we had a lot of people who had tremored many, many times because there's years of consistent practice. So in the last 12 or 18 months, what we have been doing is intentionally, sometimes it's me, and then I collaborate with other teachers, where we're in an hour's tremor class online, where we're doing about 30 minutes of another practice and then pairing that with TRE. So one of my modalities is the Feldenkrais method. It's a movement-based approach, a little bit similar to Alexander technique. There's a sort of a shared lineage there. It's kind of a slow meditative movement practice. You could almost, there'd be some analogies to sort of Qigong or Tai Chi, but coming from a very Western approach. I look at it as a very nuanced work that's about voluntary movement, and I look at TRE as a very nuanced approach that's about involuntary movement, and I find there to be a very interesting intersection. But so anyway, so that's what I do, and so you know, and your comment here in your journal was I tired out all my muscles, and then I to the point of exhaustion, and then I shook. And many people, that's how we begin tremoring, is like sort of brute forcing our body, and then we get a big release. But what this isn't only me doing this. What we can often do as people are not beginners is we don't need all of that exhaustion or things like that. That actually working through the pathway of relaxation sometimes goes quite a bit deeper. So in the sessions that I lead, first we do a lot of body scan awareness work, and then we start to explore breath work and movement. This takes us about 30 minutes or so, where in a sense we've really tuned in and already created a bit of a downshift because it's almost like we did a 30-minute movement meditation.
Yeah.
Now we go into our tremoring, and what most people experience is the tremoring is different. It's more fluid, different movements come up, new areas of tension that previously were not part of tremoring start to become included or to let go and release. So that's that exploration. Some of my colleagues are working with breathwork. So sometimes my colleague in Norway, Siv Yosang Shields, she'll do, sometimes it's box breathing, sometimes it's other breath patterns, usually with music. That's sort of the lead-in process, and then transitioning into tremoring. Another colleague, Jenna Anderson, she'll do Qigong as a warm-up, and then so we're doing quite a bit of that exploration. So I don't know. Part of it is because, you know, these people have been tremoring for a long time, and it would be, in a sense, boring to just sort of have the same experience. So what we're all a little bit seeking is what else is there here? What will sort of move the needle a little bit more? So that's kind of that ongoing project.
Yeah, and I think I totally get what you are saying, in that TRE feels like such a segment of something else. And maybe it's because I've kind of been interested in Tai Chi and obviously in Qigong, which are based on Taoism, that famous symbol of the yin yang. So I mean, I think in terms of our modern day, we know that pairing things can really help, but TRE feels like a modality that has a lot of mirrors that can kind of help almost create a full package that is, as you say, something deeper. And I think it's, really fascinating that you are exploring such a powerful question of like, how could we know this works and people, but it's still, early days, I guess, about exploring the full horizons of how it can be one segment of kind of multi-modalities, I suppose.
Right. Yep. Very much so. Yeah. So for your wife, so my wish for your wife is that she would, my curiosity for her is if she, I mean, first of all, I do think that some level of mental buy-in helps. I think there can be skepticism and very much it still succeed. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think, actually it's not skepticism, because she's certainly seen me
do it.
kind of twitch around like a fish on the floor, and I've told her that it's absolutely amazing. So, she definitely wants to. She's tried a couple times. So, I don't know, it almost seems to be more, the willingness is there, but just if you are that personality type, and so many people kind of self-label as type A.
Or type A, or a control freak, or lots of people self-identify that way, yeah.
Weirdly, I feel like you never hear people self-identify as the opposite, the kind of non-control freak.
It's true.
So Yeah, it's for me. It seems like a kind of mental switch, and it's almost like kind of learning to whistle a little bit. Like if it's one of those things where you see everyone doing it and you're trying and trying, but
Yeah.
it's just kind
So
of not
so my
working.
my hunch for, well, I don't know your wife specifically, but for that type, for me, what often can be the shift is approaching it more through a relaxation lens, meaning that, and so for example, before trying the more active movements like the hip bridge or lifting up the knees, prior to that, even spending a few minutes, even up to 10 minutes of conscious breathing or body scan meditation, anything that can kind of already downshift the nervous system a little
Hmm.
bit as a
Okay.
precursor, to me, it's more likely that they're going to be more receptive to tremoring. So for kind of one, getting, a good relaxation response initially, and then being slow with the main sequence where your knees are open, you lift, and then you bring the knees up. Um, yeah, being slow with it, which doesn't mean stretching it out inordinately, but not being in a rush, not sort of having that mental hypervigilance of, is something happening, but a little bit kind of like letting go of attachment to outcome. When people are in the building up phase, I'll often try to almost like distract them a little bit, like do other movements like roll the head a little bit, take relaxing breathing, relaxing breaths. In a sense, take their mind off what's happening in their legs. And then they might be more likely to start to get the quiver because they're not sort of
Mm,
hypervigilantly watching for
yeah,
it.
yeah,
These are little things that might add up to your
yeah.
wife sort of
Interesting.
finding it a little bit.
My hypothesis as well is, I mean, she's super fit, does
Yeah.
spin and tennis and running and yoga and everything in between. So my hypothesis is the reason I was able to do it so quickly is because I am, a schlub with kind of weak little chicken legs. So
Right.
I do a stress position and they start to tremble in
They
about
immediately
18
go.
seconds. Whereas she, can squat and run for days. So she's like,
Well, you know
yeah,
what?
this is
It's
fun.
so funny. It's so funny because the, there's this, and that's very much the stereotype in the TRE world, that if somebody's ultra fit, it might be like trying to like work through a brick wall, and you might need to super duper fatigue them. And
Yeah.
here's the weird thing, that is definitely sometimes the case. But for about 2 or 3 years, I worked with athletes at a very, very elite gym. And this was in Madison, Wisconsin when I was living there. And these were like people who were like, just gotten out of the NHL pros and professional athletes, essentially. High levels of fitness, no question about it. And I was started to work with them, and I was like, oh God, I'm going to have to get them like squatting with weights. And I mean, how am I possibly going to do this? And what was so interesting was that, at least for the majority of them, I would say probably even two-thirds, they actually, even doing the normal process, to my surprise, um, these people actually, on average, were more sensitized, meaning that that they would start
Mm.
quivering sooner. And so I've since really changed my view. So there is that type. Somebody, I think of it a lot with people who do a lot of Pilates. Pilates is
Yeah.
very control oriented in its movement. I kind of do think that sets you up. There's so much practice around precision and control that I do think then the shift into the letting go into tremoring is a bit of an issue. With but the more I've worked with athletes, I find that what I used to think of as a sort of a hard rule actually very often isn't the case. So I don't know. There's still things I'm learning about, like why is it that some people tremor more easily, and there's a
Yeah.
lot of complexity there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, watch this space. I'm going to be on her case and keep on selling the benefits of it on the regular. So,
Yeah.
maybe this time next year she'll be a convert.
Totally. Awesome. Well, Dan, I really appreciate you just sharing your own personal experience and your curiosities and the questions that have come up for you as you practice. So, yeah, this has been
It's been a pleasure, yeah, and great to kind of learn more about this fascinating aspect. Yeah, thank you.
very cool. Awesome. Thanks, Dan.
That's it for today's episode. We hope you found inspiration and new insights into the power of neurogenic tremoring.
If you enjoyed this conversation, make sure to subscribe, share, and leave a review. It really helps us reach more people interested in this transformative work.
And if you want to dive deeper, connect with us. Or to learn more about our sessions, courses, and upcoming trainings, head over to neurogenicintegration.com.